What is NASA's contingency plan to rescue Boeing Starliner astronauts from the ISS? As of today, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore have been at the International Space Station for over 2 months. They launched in a Boeing Starliner spacecraft on June 5th. We still don't know when they're coming back, and at this point, we don't even know what kind of spacecraft they will be returning in, a SpaceX Crew Dragon or Boeing Starliner. But how would a SpaceX rescue even work? What would happen to the Starliner spacecraft attached to the ISS? And can Boeing Starliner still be certified for operational flights without returning with crew? Let's break down this complicated issue. Let's start with what we know. I did a deep dive into what might be going on behind the scenes at NASA, as well as a comprehensive look on what Boeing Starliner's problems are, so check that out if you need to get up to speed. Here's where we are now. Thanks to extensive testing on the ground and the ISS, Boeing thinks they have found the root cause of the helium leaks and thruster failures. But not everyone at NASA is convinced on Starliner's safety. What NASA is focusing on specifically is that there is a Teflon seal that's deformed. Bubbling is the word that's been used to describe it. They think that's happening because the doghouses, which is where the thrusters are located, are getting much hotter than expected when the thrusters are firing. This is vaporizing propellant, and these vapors are affecting the Teflon seals. At least that's what they think, but NASA is struggling to find a concrete explanation as to why the Teflon is behaving this way. The problem is they just aren't certain. If the thrusters aren't able to hold Starliner's attitude steady during re-entry maneuvers, and if at the same time there's a catastrophic helium leak or multiple leaks that disable the OMAC thrusters, that could strand the astronauts. This is a serious issue. They can likely fix all of these problems in future versions of Starliner, but is this one safe? This is obviously all worst-case scenarios, and the likelihood of this kind of integrative failure happening is very small, but it does exist. For any flight, NASA calculates a loss of crew statistic. It's standard practice. The requirement for commercial crew providers is 1/270. Boeing's before the launch of CFT was 1/295. It's probably not that now. As a comparison, SpaceX's loss of crew statistic for their crew demonstration mission was 1/276. At a press conference today, NASA acknowledged for the first time that the SpaceX Crew Dragon rescue option is one that they are seriously considering and planning for, even going so far as to lay out what the contingency options are. Right now, I want to be clear about this. Nothing has been decided. NASA would still prefer to return Boeing Starliner astronauts in Starliner. But they have acknowledged that there's enough uncertainty at NASA to warrant laying out this backup option. Here is how a SpaceX rescue would work if it were to happen. Right now on the ISS, there are 4 Crew 8 astronauts and the 2 Boeing Starliner astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, in addition to the Russian cosmonauts. That means both docking ports on the Harmony module of the ISS are taken, one by Crew 8's Crew Dragon and one by Boeing Starliner. The way having crew at the ISS works is that there always have to be enough seats on vehicles to evacuate the crew on board at any time. That means they can't just send Suni and Butch home on the Crew 8 vehicle and leave 2 of those astronauts up there without anything to take them home if there's an emergency. This brings us to Crew 9. NASA announced yesterday that they are delaying the launch of Crew 9, which was previously scheduled for August 18th. That is getting pushed more than a month to no earlier than Tuesday, September 24th. NASA generally likes to do what they call a direct handover when it comes to space station crews. They want the crews to overlap. That can't happen if Boeing Starliner is still docked. So here's the plan, and again, I want to stress that this hasn't been greenlit. This is just an option NASA can take advantage of if they see the need to. Boeing Starliner will autonomously undock and return to Earth. That would happen in early September. There's basically a landing window every 4 days for Starliner starting September 2nd. Then Crew 9 would launch on September 24th with just 2 astronauts, not 4. So it would be 2 astronauts, 2 extra spacesuits, and 2 empty seats. NASA would put ballast in those seats to ensure that they mimic the mass of an astronaut. Butch and Sunny would basically become the 2 additional members of Crew 9 and fulfill those astronauts' responsibilities for a long-duration ISS stay. It's not clear who would get bumped from that flight, but a safe bet is that the commander and pilot would be the ones to go up. Butch and Sunny have trained extensively for this because NASA has always known there is this risk with a crew test flight, that a long-duration stay on the ISS would be necessary. Crew 9 is scheduled to last about 180 days, so Butch and Sunny would come home in February 2025, turning an 8-day mission into an 8-month mission. When does NASA have to decide this? Probably in the next week or two. They need enough time to make that Crew 9 launch date. Plus, there are some modifications that must be made to Boeing Starliner for autonomous undocking. That software is on the spacecraft, but it hasn't been used since OFT-2 in 2022. They basically need to dust it off and update it because there have been changes in the orientation of the ISS since that flight. They need to have time to make those changes and test it out before it's used. That'll take time. They will also have to modify the Crew 8 capsule to handle 2 extra astronauts before Boeing Starliner undocks. Why? Well, remember what I said about every astronaut having a way off the ISS. They have to have that contingency configuration for Butch and Sunny until Crew 9 arrives. Indications are that NASA is prepared to have Butch and Sunny stay on the ISS for a longer period of time. Remember back when Starliner launched and NASA put an important repair part for the urine processor on board that spacecraft? If you missed it, check out my video. Well, they had to pull some of Butch and Sunny's suitcases off Boeing Starliner to accommodate that part. They sent up those suitcases on an uncrewed resupply mission that docked with the ISS on Tuesday. The bottom line is that it is possible, but not easy, to bring Butch and Sunny home on a SpaceX Crew Dragon. NASA has made the contingency plans and is just waiting for more data. They're running every test they can think of on this Teflon, doing modeling, trying to figure out how it acts when exposed to different temperatures, trying to somehow replicate the environment in that doghouse on the ground. They're bringing in experts from other centers, basically anything they can do to get more concrete data on this bulging seal. So why not just make the decision and have Butch and Sunny come home on a Crew Dragon? Why all this testing when there is that option? Well, there is risk built into going to space. We just have to accept that. But bringing this crew home on another US-made vehicle is now possible, which is unprecedented in NASA's history of spaceflight. This is the first time they've had the option of 2 different US crew vehicles. There's always the Soyuz as a backup, but given geopolitical issues and the poor funding of Russia's own space program, that is not without its own set of complications. And that, in and of itself, is why this decision is so hard. If NASA opts to return Butch and Sunny home on a SpaceX Crew Dragon, that very possibly could mean the end of Boeing Starliner. It's as of yet uncertain if NASA would be willing to certify Starliner for operational flight if the crew comes home on a different vehicle. Remember, Boeing likely has enough information to fix future spacecraft, but it's this particular one called Calypso we're currently concerned about. If NASA declines to certify Boeing Starliner and asks for a second crewed flight test, which frankly would be warranted based on how this one has gone, that would likely be the end of the Boeing Starliner program. That being said, it is clear that NASA does want to certify this vehicle for flight, and if they think it's safe, they will do so based on the autonomous data. But again, safety of the crew comes before anything else. It's important to note, just as some background, that Boeing is working on a fixed-price contract for a commercial crew. This is different than the cost-plus contracts NASA uses for the vehicles it owns and operates. On those contracts, NASA is responsible for the extra costs associated with testing, with flights, with anything that goes wrong. But for this contract, NASA paid Boeing a fixed amount for 6 operational flights. Boeing has had to absorb all of the extra costs associated with these failures and delays. They've lost an incredible $1.6 billion on Starliner. If they have to do another crewed flight test, they will likely just pull out of commercial crew altogether, and SpaceX will be left as the only provider for flights to the ISS. And yes, the ISS will be retired at the end of the decade, most likely. I have a video on how that will happen and why we can't save it if you're interested. So yes, we're only possibly talking about 6 years. But NASA also has extensive experience with only one crew vehicle to service the ISS with the space shuttle, and they didn't like that experience. It is very important to them to have 2 crew vehicles. NASA doesn't take that lightly, and if they show no confidence in Starliner at this point, Boeing may opt out, which would be a shame if the spacecraft is in fact safe. So that's where we are right now. I will update again when we have more hard news from NASA or more credible speculation. But until then, thank you for watching. I am Swapna Krishna, and this is Ad Astra.